We all know that the PSA Dagger is based on a Gen 3 Glock, but is it as comfortable? Is it as reliable? And should you even buy Glocks anymore with how good these are? All things that we are gonna talk about today. However, we'd really appreciate a like and subscribe. Every little bit helps grow the channel, and we're almost at 10,000 subs. Just so we are on the same page, the Dagger Compact is going to be the same size as a Glock 19, and the Dagger full size is going to be the exact same length as a Glock 45. So when I talk about these two and I'm comparing Glock versus PSA, those are the two I'm comparing. I'm not gonna compare the full size to a Glock 19 and vice versa. When you take the slide off of a Dagger and you take the slide off of a Glock, they look very similar, and you can actually swap out aftermarket Glock parts for Dagger parts. So when we talk about how similar they are, that's how similar that they are. They take the exact same parts. So when you're looking at a Gen 3 Glock 19, you're gonna see very similar stuff for a modern PSA Dagger. They're so similar that we are actually using a Gen 3 factor trigger in here and a Glock magazine. So it's going to share the exact same internals as a Glock, which is a good thing because honestly, the Gen 3 Glocks are very proven. So we know that this system is going to be very reliable. And in our cases, we found that we haven't had any issues with it and that it is a reliable platform. The big differences with these systems is going to be ergonomics, is going to be price, and is going to be quality. When you take the slide off and you start looking at the frame of this gun, you're gonna notice some things look cheaper, and that just makes sense when you're $240 cheaper than a Glock. You kind of have to cheapen some things up to get to that price point. One of the big things that stands out with quality is the plastic feels cheaper on the frame of this handgun versus a Glock. The frame on the Glock has a nicer, softer plastic rather than on the Dagger or the Dagger Full. However, that's not gonna make it a less reliable handgun. It comes with steel sights instead of plastic sights, which is kind of funny that Glock feels like a higher quality handgun, but it's got worse sights. But now to the ergonomics. This is gonna be a little polarizing for some people. If you're directly comparing the Dagger to a Gen 3 19, the Glock does have finger grooves, whereas this only has one. It actually does feel pretty locked in. I don't hate it too much. I don't notice it a lot when I'm shooting. Whenever I'm just holding the gun and kind of one-handed manipulating it, I do notice it, especially on a reload, but it's not cumbersome, it's not annoying. I just know some people are gonna love it and some people are gonna hate it, so keep that in mind if you're looking at this. One thing we have noticed is on the full size, there's a lot more room, which makes sense. Obviously, this is a 17-round mag capacity handgun. If you don't like the finger groove, you may want to check out the full size because there's a lot more room here. It's not as noticeable when you're gripping the handgun. You don't feel all scrunched up and your fingers aren't pushing on it from both sides. One of my biggest complaints with the cheapness of the gun is going to be the mag release, and it's no fault of their own necessarily. It's a Gen 3 mag release. It's just not very positive. You have to bottom it out to get the mag to drop free. It's just a tiny little square. We ended up adding an extended mag release on the regular Dagger Compact. It helps because now you don't have to push it all the way in, bottom the mag release out to get the mag to drop free. However, it's still just a tiny small square, and it's not as good as a lot of the other handguns out there. So some of the things are kind of shining through that suck about the Gen 3 Glock, kind of suck about the Dagger as well. That's, again, no fault of their own. They're just using the same operating system, so they're kind of limited. These are optics cut, and most versions you can get a threaded barrel for like $30 to $50 more. So that's kind of where this gun shines. Is it retails for $379? That's $240 cheaper than a Glock. Unfortunately, I can only compare it to Gen 5 because Gen 3s are getting kind of hard to find, but ultimately it's a $240 difference. So if you're looking at this gun now in 2024, you're comparing it to a Gen 5 Glock, which is kind of what you should do because Gen 5s are more common and they're just a better platform than Gen 3. I still think this is a really good buy because it's so much cheaper and you basically get a free threaded barrel with this handgun, which is pretty awesome. One thing I will commend PSA for doing is the slide serrations are not so aggressive that they're obnoxious, but they're also very effective. They're very similar to the Gen 5 Glock serrations. However, the angle to them kind of make them a little more aggressive and they actually work better. We haven't had this thing out in the rain. However, they are just inherently more aggressive when you have to do press checks or you rack the slide with the slide serrations. One thing I do like a lot more on the Glock 45 or the 19 is the grip texture. It just feels a lot better in the hand, shooting or just handling the firearm. It's like these little squares that are kind of grippy. Whereas the PSA Dagger or Dagger Full, it's like this really soft stippling, and the cheapness of the plastic doesn't really do much for you for grip. I don't actually even notice it much. I wish it was a little bit more aggressive. It kind of reminds me of like 1000 Grip sandpaper that's been used. It's like it's there, but like it's not doing anything. It does look really good on the gun with the outlines. It looks like a really nice stipple job. However, it's just not crazy effective, whereas the Glock actually feels very planted in your hand, and you can actually see the little squares if you hold the gun for a really long time. You can see them imprinted on your hand, so you know it's actually gonna do something when you're shooting. Both guns shoot relatively similar. Honestly, if you're shooting it, you're not really gonna recognize a difference. Where you see the difference is the Dagger Compact to the Dagger Full, which is gonna be the same for the Glock 19 or the Glock 45. The Dagger Compact, especially with a mag wall on it, it keeps your hand really sucked up into the gun and does a better job at mitigating recoil, for me anyway. Whereas the X Full, there's a gap between my finger and the mag well. So I feel like I don't have as tight of a grip on this handgun as I do the Dagger Compact or a Glock 19. However, it's gonna shoot very similar to its Glock counterpart, which again is a good thing because Glocks shoot relatively flat. They're relatively low recoiling. The grip angle makes it very easy to fight recoil. One thing that Glock does have over the PSA is the backstrap system, where you can mount on thicker back straps to increase the width of the frame. In my opinion, I've never ran these because I didn't like them. It just felt like an afterthought with a piece of plastic on the back of the gun. A lot of people use them, a lot of people modify them to make them fit their hands. However, on the PSA Dagger, there is no backstrap system. You will not be able to add anything. Once you buy the frame, you're kind of stuck with it. You can't add or subtract too much from the frame. One thing I can appreciate that PSA did is they built in this little thumb rest for your support hand. It's nothing crazy, but it is a very nice index point, and your thumb naturally fits on there, and it kind of works like a little gas pedal. I didn't notice it reducing any recoil, but it is a great place to index your thumb. That's a common thing that a lot of people do aftermarket for a Glock frame. It's kind of nice that it was already built in on the PSA Dagger. As we said earlier, the Dagger is going to fit a lot of the aftermarket Glock parts. For instance, we have a Cogworks slide release on here. We have a Factor trigger, obviously just running a Holosun dot on here. We're also running a Gen 3 mag release. I can't remember who makes this off the top of my head. We actually did a video on this build if you guys want to check that out. A lot of Glock parts do fit on this. Obviously it's the same operating system. However, with holsters, you may not find the same luck. This is a T-Rex Arms Gen 5 Glock 19 holster that fits a TLR1, which is basically this, except this is on the Gen 3 platform, and it's not going to fit. I feel like we do have a couple holsters that fit if you loosen them up, so keep that in mind. You're probably gonna wanna find a holster that is made for the Dagger. You may get lucky and it'll fit some of your Glock holsters, especially ones that are Gen 3, but just note that not all manufacturers will work, so keep that in mind, that you may have to end up buying a new holster for this. One of the few cons I do have with the Dagger is going to be the trigger. I really hate this hinged trigger system. It's just not a very good trigger. It's squishy, it's got a rolling brake, it's got a crappy hinge safety, just bad all around. One of the things I would do right off the bat with the money I saved is buy an aftermarket trigger, just because I don't like this one at all. Some of you guys may like this. Don't buy one the same time you buy the gun, because you should probably shoot this and see if you like this first. That'll be a better bang for buck for you, coming in at $240 of savings. However, for me, I almost want to change it off right off the bat. The only reason I haven't changed this one out is because I want to put more rounds through it and see if it gets better. A lot of the Glock triggers are famous for that. They get better with time, and the more rounds you put through them, the better they get. So I kind of want to see if that happens here with the Dagger. However, initial impressions is I hate this trigger. And to me, it's worse than a Gen 3 Glock trigger. Definitely worse than a Gen 5 Glock trigger. One of the big things with this trigger too is that there's just so much take up, which is really interesting. If you look at a Gen 5 45, there's a lot less. It may be a similar take up in that this little trigger safety movement is adding 1/8 of an inch of play, but that's probably one of my only cons with the Dagger, is going to be this trigger is just really bad. So who is the PSA Dagger for, and is it better than a Gen 5 Glock 19 or Glock 45? No, it's not better. It's gonna be cheaper, yes, $240 cheaper, and if you're on a budget, this is gonna be a pretty good option for you. I'd recommend changing out the trigger. I'd recommend adding a better mag release, so that's going to add up cost. But if you're looking at a Gen 3 clone versus a modern Gen 5 Glock, I just think the Gen 5 Glock wins. Yes, it's gonna be more money, but you're gonna have better grip texture, better trigger. You're gonna have a legacy name to back up the handgun you are carrying. It's incredibly reliable. You're not gonna have to worry about it. These are relatively new guns and have not been as tested. Even though they're based on a Gen 3 platform, they don't have as much testing done to them. We haven't seen any malfunctions yet, which is a good thing. It solidifies this in the market and fills that budget niche. And honestly, I would rather people pay $350 for this than some of the options that are at that price range. So if you're a new shooter, you don't own a Gen 3, 4, 5 Glock, and you're looking to pick up something similar, I think this is a great option. $240 cheaper, There's not too much wrong with it, and it still has pretty good reliability. I think it's just a great option all around. Is it gonna replace my Gen 5 Glock 19? No, it's not. But I'm not a new shooter, so if you are a new shooter and you're on a budget, this is a pretty great option. If you guys want to support Herrington Arms, we actually make a compensator and a magwell for the Dagger. Full video right here. We actually did a full build list on this. If you guys learned something and you appreciate this video, please drop a like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.